everyone, and welcome to Perfect Pitch. I'm your host, Nicole Rodriguez, also the CEO and founder of NRPR Group. As most of you who've joined us before know, this is where I get to allow the minds and the mouths of our media friends to help us understand why why they like things the way they do, how they got to where they are, and they get to give us their perspective. And for me, this is a gift that hopefully all of you guys will take notes, and really be mindful of as we approach our media friends who, as many of you have heard me say, I don't believe that PR people could even have jobs if it wasn't for the media. So showing our respect and our gratitude for what they do on a day-to-day by also paying attention to what makes a good story, what makes them tick, what do they like to do even outside of journalism, getting to know them on the human side. So that being said, as you guys know, I love bringing on great media friends of ours. And today's guest was actually introduced to me by none other than our lovely Linda Starr. She and our guest, Stacey Higginbotham. And please, Stacey, if I don't say that right or didn't say that right, we'll have you jump in and fix that for me. But I'm joined today by Stacey, who is the publisher of Stacey on IoT. For those of you who don't know what IoT is, Internet of Things, and a co-host on This Week in Google and host of the Internet of Things podcast. She's worked as a tech journalist for over 20 years, writing for the Austin Business Journal, The Deal, GigaOM, Fortune magazine, and covering finance and technology. So without further ado, welcome, Stacey. Thank you so much for joining us.
So glad to be here. And I feel a little weirded out by you calling me a media friend. I feel like a puppy.
No.
That is just awkward as I probably look at a lot of the PR people as kind of a necessary evil. And not saying you're evil. I'm just saying that many times y'all can be kind of irritating. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And everyone else is like, oh man, not this attitude.
No, are you kidding me? Bring it. I've been in PR for 21 years, started in tech, and I understand, which is why I started this podcast. Most PR people annoy me. So how about that? That's why it's very, very hard trying to get through the interview process at my company isn't easy. I don't believe in blasting. I'll never do it. I won't let anyone in my company do it. I believe in doing homework, and I believe in creating friendships with the media. So people like Dean Takahashi, who I sincerely call a dear friend, over at VentureBeat. So not like a puppy. In fact, behind closed doors, we call you guys homies. That's how we do over at NRPR. But anyone that we actually do bring into the fold, we're here to actually help the media. And if PR people don't see their job as being that, then they're not doing their job right. So with that being said, that is exactly why I started this, because most PR people don't get it. And I think they need to hear from people like you who have been burned and been irritated. So I want to get into all of that. Let's do it.
All right. Let's do it.
Yes.
First question. Let's go.
All right. So how and why did you get into finance and tech in terms of journalism?
I did that very early on because I liked sleeping and I liked having a social life. And when you started out in journalism, if you started out as a news reporter, you were going to start out like on the cop shop, which is like I'm going to say 10 o'clock to 2 a.m., 8 o'clock to 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., you listening to the police radio and writing up tiny stories for the paper. And I did not want to do that. So I figured I was actually decent at math. I really like science. And I thought journalism, doing something around tech or finance would be really easy. And apparently a lot of other journalists didn't like doing math. And so that's kind of how I fell into it. And I love it.
I love that. I love that. And I would say, honestly, 2 decades ago, I remember just graduating college and having the choice, like, well, what kind of PR do you want to do? And I knew that tech was what a lot of people are actually shying away from. But I was like, this is our future. If you're not interested in learning tech at all, imagine 40 years from now, your job would be obsolete, because even things like fashion, you've got, biotech, what's it called? No, bionic clothing. Mm-hmm. You don't know how to talk about things like that. Well, then you're looking to be out of a job after a couple of years. So I I commend you for that and for seeing that through, because tech has taken over all of our lives. So I love it.
I'm like, sure, loving sleep, recognizing the future. But yes, I do think, especially now with what I cover, IoT,
Mhm.
I've actually had to learn a lot about so many other industries. So I was hardcore into the technology, wireless chips, all of that good stuff. And then now I'm learning about like appliances and, like you said, fashion and all kinds of manufacturing stuff that I'm like, what? And
Right?
cars, and it's fun.
I love it. Yeah, it's like how do I listen to Spotify from my refrigerator now? Right? Like, how do I connect this, because now I can order all my groceries from the screen of my computer, or that is like literally embedded into my refrigerator, and then have that talking to this device and this device. And I think that's one of the fascinating, I think, things of Internet of Things, because everything can now be connected just about, and it's just wild. What are some of the things that you're seeing right now that you think people should be paying attention to, or things that you're really, really excited about? Say between now and like 10 years from now, this is how things are going to be. I'd love to hear that from you.
Sure. If I think about things that are of interest to a consumer or a business audience, on the consumer side, I think in the next year or two, we're going to see a lot of stuff happen to make the smart home way more accessible and much
Mhm.
more useful to people without the kind of, right now, it's a lot of pain for very little reward. So that's going to shift thanks to a new interoperability standard that the big companies are promoting. Uh, networks like Amazon Sidewalk are going to be a big deal, giving really cheap connectivity to sensors everywhere. Whereas, like, it used to be cellular, now it's not going to be. So those are the things on the consumer side. I will say in the business side, I'm not going to say 5G because it's just blah, boring. I will
That's like
say,
a shot game. Every time someone says 5G, you
yes,
have
I'm
to take
not
a
going to
shot.
say it. But I will say putting computing everywhere makes information that was makes everything that was formerly invisible visible. And that is such a huge thing for businesses to adapt to,
Mhm.
both because you'll be able to make your processes more efficient, but you're also going to be able to see, both consumers, businesses, and like governments are going to see the externalities associated with production. So that means noticing things like pollution or a lack of security. You're going to be able to see those things and see how you'll be able to apply metrics to them so you can change the way you're operating. Instead of optimizing possibly for profits, you could optimize for employee wellness,
Yes.
carbon reduction. Ideally, you're going to optimize for kind of all of these things in different layers, but it's going to be really amazing. And we talk all the time about living in a data driven future or data driven society. We're actually going to have that. And hopefully, we're preparing for that with the critical thinking skills, the ability to figure out, like, oh, just because I have this data point that says this, it doesn't negate that I have a completely different data point that says that. So that's a lot. That's the big picture where I think we're heading, and it's going to be awesome
I love
or
it. No.
scary. It
Probably
could be
scary
both.
for, yeah, scary for some people who watch Terminator too many times. But definitely exciting for those of us who like watching people innovate and like seeing the outcomes of great innovations, right? Like I for one am excited about having a data driven sort of culture, society, being a marketer, being able to take a look at that and be like, see, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, right? And dissecting things. Literally, data helps us see behaviors too that we didn't necessarily have access to seeing before, right? Like, oh, we didn't know that when people do X, they also do Y. And now with things being so connected, we're able to see and understand even human behavior, I think, even better.
We
So
are, although I will say you're going to get the information you ask for, which means you might not measure the right thing. And I will also say all of this technology has to be deployed because it is potentially so intrusive
yeah,
with a very high level of ethics. So, like, marketing is getting a huge bad rap right now, specifically the ad side, because of all the data and how it's being used. So, I think every industry probably should be talking a lot more about ethics than they are right now.
totally. And leadership. right? I really think leadership, it's less, I don't know, Mad Men, and this is what happens behind closed doors, and this is how we come up with a campaign, and more, this is what we need to do to make good decisions, both on the consumer side and the business side. And I think having a solid, ethics, yes, but also just EQ, really understanding, how to build a company and not just a tech product.
Mhm.
People want to see the human side of these companies now, and you can't just shove advertising in their face and assume that people are going to buy now. So I think those are very valid points, and I do think that that's where leadership comes through, and good leaders should have very good ethics at the same time. So yeah, I love it. So with that being said, what are some of the things that you are trying to cover right now? Like, what is it that you want to get access to when it comes to information, or when it comes to spokespeople? What is it that you're sort of looking for with how you're covering IoT?
Sure. This is really it's a grab bag because I have a very deep, technically savvy audience. I can do stories that are super nerdy, like network slicing in 5G is something I cover. I will talk to people about super deep security things or chip architectures. But I also really want to drive home to people how those affect the rest of the world and the way we're developing things. So that's always been like, I will never just say, hey, they've launched new chips. I have to say, they've launched this. This is why this matters, blah, blah, blah. I mean, every journalist is going to tell you that on their beat. I also really love case studies because what we're asking companies to do is so hard. Like, there's so many buzzwords about, oh, your digital transformation. Understanding where companies have gone wrong is really important, and where they've gone right. That's fine too. I'm not looking for, a bunch of negatives, but there are things that when you first implement and start making the invisible visible, you're going to mess up because you don't actually understand what's about to happen, right? You're like, oh my gosh, it's like the first time you travel to a foreign country and like you walk into a bathroom or a restaurant and you do something slightly wrong because you're like, oh, I'm a dumb American, right? So it's that sort of thing. You want to help people walk through that because it's a huge complex technical problem, but it's also a business process problem. So we have to teach people how to engage or what might happen from that perspective.
I love
So that's
it.
a lot.
No. This is all great. And I mean, in terms of details too, it's kind of like people aren't going to know if they don't hear it for themselves. And I think again, the approach when approaching a journalist, I always try to enforce this into my team. Just do your homework. Read Stacey's stuff. You listen to Stacey here on the show, pay attention to what she wants and needs. And if it's not clear, make sure that you're reading even more. Ask, hey, Stacey, here are three sentences about this. I just noticed that you covered this. Does this even, here's the why. Here's why I think it would matter. Does this sound good to you? Versus here's 7 paragraphs, the company's history. I want you to sit here and read this novel about them and then tell me what you think, Stacey. That's not the way to approach it. And you shouldn't be on anyone's just general blast list. Oh, here, Stacey, here's some crap about a chip that's launching. Nobody
Eh,
wants
I,
that, right?
I do actually appreciate the blast list for random chips. I will scan most things just to make sure that I need to like keep up with it. But those aren't going to turn into stories. Those are more just like to keep me
In
abreast.
Intel. Yeah.
But I will say, I'll give a very particular example. There was uh, this ended up in Fortune as, I think it ended up in the print magazine too. I can never remember. People like print. Um, so the PR person of a company called Gazelle that basically buys old consumer devices and then ships them out to new, it's like a reseller market for consumer phones and computers. I guess that person had been listening to my show for years and I had no idea. And he reached out and he was like, hey, just so you know, we stuck a Philips Hue light bulb, which is a connected light bulb that's smart and changes colors, in our factory or in our warehouse. So for the shipping warehouse. And he said, we are using it because when we get a whole lot of orders in once, we do same day shipping. when we get a bunch of orders, we need all hands on deck to pack to get it out the same day. So we use that light bulb as like we turn it a different color based on whatever level of personnel we need. And since they're busy, but the light changes in the whole warehouse, they're like, oh, crikey, I've got to go run over. And that was so clearly pitched towards me. I mean, it was a neat story. It had a business use case. He just reached out, and it wasn't like one of those, hey, Stacey, I read your article on, 5G, insert random link for my story. Will you talk to the CEO of this company that also has a tangential relationship to 5G? But that was a perfect pitch. It ended up being a very nice story. Philips Hue was so excited to see it because they hadn't any idea that someone was using it this way. And they called them and were like, hey, what do you think about our APIs? What can we do better? So all in all, really cool. Those
I
are the things
love
we want.
that. Yeah, no, for sure. And the fact that it was a personal use case, right? That he literally was coming from a place of like, this I've done. This might seem interesting to you. I've been listening to your show forever, and there's clearly a respect there, right? A respect for your work and thoughtfulness that went into that. And I think, to your point too, if blastless in terms of chips and hey, let me keep you up to speed is good for you to stay up to speed, great. I just think that too many PR people have been taught to use it as a crutch, and they kind of do this, let me put together any sort of blast and keep my fingers crossed, and then they go to a client and they say, great, we got you this, and they want to take basically credit for a Wire release, and it's like, oh, look, the Wire picked up all of these stories. It's like, that's not pitching media, that's putting it on the Wire.
There is way
So
too much to connect on a wire. Like there are certain companies I will follow religiously, and I
yeah,
do try to pick up all their wire news, but I'm not going to get everything.
yeah,
So I don't mind if someone understands my narrow interests and sends something. I will say a huge pet peeve, and this happens more often than you think.
mm,
I will get even with people I have relationships with, I get emails from them saying, hey, you just wrote about network slicing. I'm just talking about network slicing constantly. So sorry.
love it.
Um,
Yeah.
but you just wrote about network slicing. You talked to our guy a year ago about this. I wanted to let you know that we now have this client that is using it in a factory setting to reduce carbon. And I was like, oh my God, that's perfect. Thank you. And I was like, let's set up an interview because I really
Mhm.
want to talk to the client and figure out what they're using it for. And
Yeah.
then he gets back to me and he's like, oh, well, I can't get you an interview until 2 weeks from today. And then I'm like,
It's so deflating.
and this happens a lot where like you're gonna if you're teeing up a release and I
Yeah.
reply within the day it's released, if you don't have an interview ready for me, I would say sometime, if not that day or the next day,
Yep.
3 days maximum. And my God, what are you even there for? Why are you even sending
Yeah.
this out?
Why? It's literally pre-planning, right? It's like I am going to offer this because I know I have this for you, and thinking about what's the end game. At the end of the day, we want Stacey to say she wants to talk to someone because then at that point we know she's going to ask some really intelligent questions, and this might lead to a really great piece. But if I'm telling her and then she can't talk to the person until September 1 and it's July whatever it is, yeah, you're
It's not
right. That
that bad,
doesn't
but
make any,
yeah.
I know, but yeah, it
And
doesn't make
and
any sense.
and they always come back with, can we do this via email? And in some cases, 100%. But an email conversation on anything technical or anything like business process oriented is
Yeah.
really lame.
Yeah.
And I know that people want to do that, but I mean, it's easier for your person, it's easier for y'all to get the right message out, but it's also
Yeah.
incredibly boring. And if I don't understand something,
Yeah.
it, oh,
How you
I
fill
won't
in
even
the
waste my time.
knowledge gaps. Yeah. And look, this too, I encourage PR people to tell their executives, if you sign on with us or we're working in house with you, this is the level of respect that you have to have for the media and what they're trying to do. One, in order to get a good piece, sometimes those nuggets come out in conversation.
All the time.
Some right, and it's like
They never
sometimes
come out, yeah,
in
in
just an
email.
email. It's so perfectly curated and here's every perfect word that it's like, well, there are gaps there, right? Because things have been edited probably 3 or 4 times before it leaves the CEO to go to the PR person. They've probably had a couple of other people look at it, and they're not looking at it from your perspective. And that, I think, is the hard part. It's like you want a good story, you've got to give the reporter a good experience and help them really dig in so they can, do this and get it right for their audience. Now, I hear you in that. I think that there's probably a lot more that PR people can do to get their executives in the mindset that if we have this big announcement, clear your schedule. Clear
Or
your
if it's
schedule
not
and
even,
get
I mean,
ready.
some of these aren't even horribly huge announcements, but if you're
Mm,
going to reach out to someone with a personalized, I know you've been into this,
yeah.
you know, and to someone who's clearly, I will say, because I've done this for 20 years, I feel that I have good interview skills in the sense that
Yeah.
I come into it knowing what I don't know, knowing what I want to know, and they're usually decent questions.
Yeah.
The executive is never coming off of an interview with me going, well, that was a waste of my time. They're usually like, oh, you seem to know a lot about my industry. So I feel like I don't know. This is
Yeah.
just me complaining.
No, I love this. Honestly, this is it. This is where we take this all in and hopefully put it out into the universe, and enough PR people will pay attention. That for me is like the biggest thing, because I hate to say it, but I've been in this industry long enough to know that there are some PR people I never want to work with, because they don't work with the level of integrity needed to work with journalists, to even make executives take this profession seriously. It's like, oh, the PR person, she's going to write a press release and put it out. That's not what we're meant to just do.
Well,
We're meant to
there are
to be the
economics,
bridge.
yeah, and there are economics associated with your profession that makes this hard. I mean, not a lot of people stay in the field for very long.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of people coming in, and it's hard to train them and utilize them effectively from the get-go. And yeah, a lot of executives don't respect what you're doing. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's one of those things where it's like, coming in with just also understanding, having a high level of how do I say this? When it comes to training, writing, there's never an email that leaves an at NRPR group email without it actually going through an editor. Because I'm like, there's no
wow.
way you're sending. Yeah, no, I hired an in-house editor to edit pitches, because I'm like, if there's an email that looks like there's all this grammar stuff and a journalist reads that, they write for a living. They're going to be the first to judge your writing. No, that's not happening under my watchman. I worked in 4 PR firms before starting mine 7 years ago. And I was like, this is just a gap. We need an in-house person who's helping make sure that these pitches, one, don't suck, and two, actually have the I's dotted, T's crossed, so that journalists can look at this and say, you know what, they're doing this right. I like how this flows. This sounds good. Um, and that's how juniors get trained the best, right? You just kind of take the red pen to the writing and they finally get it. But that's how executives and journalists at least look at you, right? Like a small pocket of us, and they say, okay, you guys care enough to actually do the work that can get the right results. So yeah, that definitely happens at our firm. I don't know any other firms that have an in-house journal, like literally a ex-journalist who edits every pitch before it goes out.
Wow.
Yeah. So it just, that's how much respect we have for people like you who take the time. And I want to get into homework that you do, right? You say that you come in with really great questions. You take the time to get a great interview going. What are some of the things that you do to prepare for some of those interviews? And what do you do to, or what could a PR person do to help with that process to make it easier?
Oh, honestly, I mean, having done this for 20 years, a lot of my questions are based on just doing this every day, having a
Yeah.
beat. Um, and then the basic research I do, I look up the company, I check out its website, I check out its recent blog posts, I check out any recent news articles about it.
Yeah.
If it's publicly traded, I'll look at its, the last few 10Ks. Um, let's see. Um, if I'm doing something like super investigatory, then I'll usually talk to everyone else before I talk to the company. So
That's good.
you're never, I mean, but that's a very different, like if it's just like a quick startup interview or something
Mm,
like that, then that is very much like I usually approach the company, and I usually approach them because I've talked to somebody in my day-to-day reporting that said, "Hey, do you know this guy? Or do you know this company? It's pretty cool." Or
yeah.
we're looking at it. Um, and then I'll reach out to them. So I guess that's kind of, I mean, I don't do a tremendous amount of homework because I'm not usually writing a lot of gotcha kind of things. I'm
Sure.
usually doing tech explainers.
Hmm.
But when I do those, I talk to lots of people and, get into the engineering side. So I do know what's to ask.
Yeah, got it. And, in terms of spokespeople, right? You've probably had some good spokespeople who give you what you need, and some where you're like trying to pull information out from them. What makes a good, executive or spokesperson, for you for something that you're doing?
If it's for a podcast, they have to be able to articulate their vision clearly, and they have to be able to talk to someone like they're a normal human being. So I can't have someone on who talks about like end-to-end solutions the whole time. It's excruciating.
Right.
And I will stop them in the middle of the recording and I'm like, "Hey, look, talk to me like we're having a beer. I'm your like friend from high school. Let's just sit down and have this." They also have to have a lack of accent or speak slowly enough with an accent that it's intelligible for as many people as possible.
Mhm.
Obviously, we record in English. Most of our audience is the English speaking world. So that's tough. And then having charisma or presence.
Yeah.
If I'm talking to someone about a story, you don't have to have those things. You just have to have a core idea or ability to understand. And I will talk to, I, a lot of the times, I get stuck between talking to a CTO and a CEO or the marketing person. And I kind of straddle between. So usually the CTO is great about like some technical things, but they're not great necessarily always at the vision. So I tend to do better with like any of the co-founders or like
Yeah.
when they're talking about what they're after and then following up on the technical side with people. But that's not always the case. And
Got it.
the marketing people can be great because if your founder's super technical and not, I don't know. I mean, I will always talk to a founder over a marketer though, just
Yeah.
because.
I think that should be as crazy as it sounds. I've even said this, as a rule of thumb. Oftentimes in house, our uh, for agencies, are the person that we're interfacing with the most usually is the CMO. And sometimes
Mhm.
you have a CMO who's like, well, what kind of interviews can I do? And I'm always like, well, when someone hears something from the CEO, they know they're hearing it from the visionary, the leader. Maybe they're not the most technical, but they understand the technology behind it. When they're listening to a marketer, there's always that apprehension: am I being sold to? He might
Right.
sound great. You might sound like you can speak about the company, its journey, its vision. Great. But there's a certain level of believability, right? And so I usually will say, I won't pitch the marketer person like the CMO unless it's a
You know,
marketing outlet, because it's like, it's just less believable. But to hear you say that you've talked to a few and that's where sometimes it makes sense.
in a
um
highly technical field like security is
yeah.
a good one. And especially because a lot of companies are putting out more and more reports and things
Yeah.
like gathering data, I think a CMO is fine for something like that, just
Mhm.
because they're pulling on data they built this for marketing purposes anyway.
Mhm.
And a lot of the marketers in especially startups actually do have some experience. Like I just
Mhm.
talked to a product evangelist who has an alphabet soup of security credentials after his name. I had no problem talking to him. And
Yeah.
he did a much better job than someone else at trying to articulate how these vulnerabilities might affect people in layman's terms. So there are ways to get them out there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, clearly what I'm hearing is the priority would be the visionary, as long as they could, articulate both from the technical and the, visionary side of things well, and come with character and presence if they're going to be on your podcast, or just the information if it's going to be for something written. And then if it's a data-driven story where the marketing person kind of had their fingers in all of that anyway, that they could be a good resource for you. Correct?
Yes, I don't want them to feel bad.
Yeah.
There's a
Love
place
it.
for them.
Right. Definitely. A place for everyone. So Stacey, a little bit, I'm doing a time check here. Linda, thank you for, keeping me honest. Because there's so
Yeah,
many questions that we could probably ask.
We've got just a few more minutes, so.
Yeah. So you kind of led into this, but I kind of want to get into, what do you never, ever want a PR person to do, whether it's on an interview with you, because I know sometimes they'll staff them, or in a pitch? If you could just wish it into the universe and say, please, I hope this never, ever happens again, what would that be?
So I would say if I don't respond to the first 2 emails, I'm terrible at email, but I probably don't care.
Yeah.
The other thing is, please don't call on or tweet or find me on Instagram or whatever and pitch me there. I haven't seen, I didn't see you respond to my email, so I thought I'd catch you here. Don't do that.
Yeah.
You're not going to get anything.
Don't slide into my DMs, please, on Instagram.
Yeah. And then in an interview, look, I have so many interviews with founders who are just starting out and they don't know what they're talking about or doing. That is your job as a PR person to educate them. It is not my job. So when they say something to me and they're like, oh, but please don't put that in your article, it's too freaking late. And to have the PR person, and I know you do this because you're paid by the company and not by me, but to have the PR person say, oh, do you think you can? When I say, look, I can't do that, I need you to say, yeah, no one does that. Yep. I mean, I don't really need you to say, but it would be really nice to be like, Bob, that ship has sailed.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, to be honest, I am with you on that, Stacey. That is also why PR people put together a briefing document. If your executive has only been on 2 or 3 other interviews, it's a brand new company, they're excited, they're hyped up about this funding that they're about to close, but that's not what this interview is about. And then they say, oh yeah, and then next month we're going to announce the 8 million that we just closed, but and then later they say, oh, by the way, can you not say that? Like, it is our job to make sure that in that note, just please remember, this is not about the funding, this is about X, do that, and then we'll talk to them later about the funding, because it's not, we want to make sure that a great interview happens. You shouldn't have to think about whether or not they did anything wrong. Everything on an interview is fair game. And if the PR person didn't, I'm with you on that. So, nope, totally. And that is why just the level of integrity and planning. Otherwise, it's like, then, a monkey could do our job. Write a press release, put it out, hit send, it's done. That's not what our profession was meant to do. And I really do believe that we should be building bridges with journalists on behalf of the company, so that eventually you should feel comfortable enough reaching out and saying, hey, Mr. CEO, whatever, I'd like to chat with you. But you also CC Nicole, because it's like, Nicole, I know he's super busy. If he doesn't see this email, I need to talk to him. And trust that I would get on the phone and be like, bro, we need to talk to her now. This is a great opportunity. So that's, in a perfect world, we've been able to create those types of relationships. But I think more people need to be looking out, here's how I can come to this relationship side of things and help people like Stacey. And at the same time, a client gets helped in between, So I just think that there's so much room for improvement. And just chatting with people like you, hearing this type of feedback, this is all real, right? And you're trying to do a job and do it well. And if we can help you do that, then everybody's happy. And it's just a few less annoying PR people that you have to deal with.
Something like
We
that.
hope. Right. Right. So I know we're getting ready to wrap up, Stacey. Is there anything that you want to make sure is shared here? Anything that you also want the audience to know? Is there anything that you want to promote, push people towards? Check me out here, listen to my podcast. Open range to be able to do that as well.
Oh, well, I would say if you have people doing cool stuff in IoT, applying technology to cool places in people's lives, I have a great audience for who are building connected devices, who are securing connected devices, who are consumers. Half my audience are consumers who buy crazy stuff. Like, I love them. They're so crazy. Or building crazy
Love
stuff
it.
for themselves. So feel free to share even improbable stories because you never know if they'll become probable stories.
There you go. There you go. Well, Stacey, this has been awesome. I really do appreciate your time. Know how busy you are. And I look forward to staying in touch and maybe eventually making it less weird if we call each other friends. But thank you so much for this great discussion. I really have enjoyed it. So, and you audience members, as always, thank you for listening in. And hopefully you were taking very copious notes. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, all the places that you listen to podcasts, or if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe button. Stacey, thank you so much for your time. And Linda, shout out to Linda Starr. Thank you for making sure that we got this connection. This has been great.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Nicole.
Nope.